Good evening. I'd like to call to order the Tuesday, February 11th regular meeting of the Boulder Valley School District Board of Education. Sandy, will you please call the roll?
Albright.
Here.
Belleville. Here. Benford. Here. Fuqua. Here. Marquis. Here. Myers. Reed.
Here.
Thank you. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'd like to remind everyone that the mission of the Boulder Valley School District is to create challenging, meaningful, and engaging learning opportunities so that all children thrive and are prepared for successful, civically engaged lives. The first item on our agenda is the superintendent's report. Bruce, Dr. Messenger. Thank you.
President Albright, members of the board, good evening and welcome. So I have just a couple items that I'd like to share with you this evening, and if you'll bear with me, I'm actually going to read from some of this because I think it's significant and has to do with our school district being nominated by the Colorado Department of Education to the U.S. Department of Education for the Colorado 2014 Green Ribbon School District Award. Over the next few months, the department will review all states' nominations and make final determinations on Tuesday, April 22nd, on Earth Day. The U.S. Department of Education will announce the 2014 Green Ribbon School honorees via a live-streamed announcement. So our staff has been in conversation and sharing information about the good work that's going on in our district. According to the Colorado Department of Education, it was clear that the Boulder Valley School District has a strong commitment to being healthy and sustainable and an exemplary model of achievement, sustainability, health, and environmental education. Quote. The application process consists of a written application to the Colorado Department of Education, a site visit, of which I had a chance to visit with our guests that came to visit our school district, and a final review by the U.S. Department of Education. This year, BVSD submitted an application for a district award, and we hope to have schools apply for school awards in future years. So under the leadership of Dr. Gita Carroll and many others, this has been an ongoing effort in our district, as you know. So maybe an opportunity for recognition at the national level certainly will represent Colorado in that process, which we're proud of. So anyway, I just wanted to share that with you. Another item is that this evening, Don Orr, Assistant Superintendent Don Orr, Assistant Superintendent for Operations, and Glenn Segru, who's our planner, are meeting with the Louisville City Commission in a work session. There was a brief note in the paper you may have seen this morning. This will provide an opportunity upon their request for our team to share some updated enrollment data, not unlike what you had a chance to see this morning when you met with the Boulder City Commission, but obviously related to Louisville. So as you've heard, there's some concern about the enrollment patterns as it relates to Louisville Elementary School. So part of that's to provide them information so they know what our plan is. We believe we have a good plan for the next year or two, and then we believe that by reducing the open enrollment in that one elementary school, that it will balance out as it did Whittier a couple of years ago. So we've tried to keep you informed on that, and so Glenn and Don will do a good job this evening, I think, sharing information and also answering questions that they might have. Then other big work that's going on in the district, we met with the Strategic Planning Steering Committee yesterday. Members of that steering committee that were in attendance with you at the work session a couple of weeks ago spoke about that experience and appreciated your questions, your comments, and embracing them in the work they're doing. So that led to a really productive meeting yesterday. We'll be providing you a written update as we progress with that. So of those 10 work groups that you heard about 2 weeks ago, we've developed purpose statements for each of those groups to launch their work, kind of their charge, and then we will begin under Dr. Pilcher's leadership doing some recruiting for folks who will co-chair those work teams, and then later in the spring we'll begin to recruit for a representative group to serve as members of the work group. So the work continues, and feel good about the progress we made in a day-long meeting yesterday. And then finally, we are filling some administrative positions right now, which you may be aware of. So we have 2 middle schools in South Boulder, Platt Middle School and Southern Hills. So we're working through that process. Also Helena High School and Whittier Elementary School are our principalships that we're working on right now. And so we're in process of screening candidates, visiting with folks, and setting up appointments for interviews. And as we've done in the past, we'll have a committee that represents our faculty and parent community that will do a series of interviews of the candidates on a day-long event. Then we'll have a community reception. And then I will be joined by members of the senior leadership team to do a second interview with the finalists, probably 3 or so candidates. And then we'll continue our work on background checks and bring forward a recommendation to you later in the spring. So I just want you to know those are going. We've also posted and are looking at the assistant superintendent for school leadership, that vacancy that we have. So we're working through that application process as well. So there may be others to come, but those are the ones we're working on. Did I miss any? Are we good? Did I say? Oh, I regressed. Sorry. I did fill Helena High principalship twice in my 14-year tenure there, but I assume that principal is doing fine. It was a fine principal, a great selection I made there. So we're not doing Helena High. Certainly we're not doing it from this office. We're doing Boulder High. I apologize. I've almost made the transition, but not entirely. That will end my report, and I'd be glad to answer any questions about Helena or Boulder.
Are there any questions? Comments? No? Okay, great. Thank you very much. The next item on our agenda is public hearing and public participation, and we do have one person signed up to address the board. The board recognizes the value of public comment on issues related to the operation of the schools. To ensure that our meeting is conducted in an orderly manner, we ask that persons who address the board, one, confine your comments to matters that are germane to the business of the school district. Speakers on agenda items will be heard first, followed by those speaking on non-agenda items. Limit your presentation to 2 minutes. If we go over the first hour, which we won't today, but please limit your presentation to 2 minutes. Recognize that students often attend or view our meetings. Speakers' remarks, therefore, should be suitable for an audience that includes kindergarten through 12th grade students. The board president may interrupt, warn, or terminate a participant's statement that is unrelated to the business of the district or inappropriate for K-12 students. There's a lighting system on the podium. When you start, it's green and you have 2 minutes. It turns yellow when you have 30 seconds remaining, and it turns red at the end. When the light turns red, please wrap up your comments so that the board can hear from other people and proceed with our agenda. So, our first speaker tonight is Nanette McBride talking about the Common Core curriculum. So please, thank you for coming this evening.
Thank you that I can be here today. I came here last year regarding Common Core, and I have a lot of concerns about it, and I really don't like it. And now that we're really into it, I really don't like it with my kids. And I just received a newsletter called The Sum from Boulder Valley School District. Jackie Weber had written it. And there was a big thing on there that said, the opening article said, drastic changes means scores will drop. And I don't know how this is good for our students. My kids in their classes have really been trying so hard. I've even had to hire an outside tutor, and it's difficult to hire a tutor because they don't know the Common Core. And so the ultimate goal of the core is to, do it their way. Even if my kid gets the right answers, if he doesn't do this problem correctly, he doesn't get it right. And his brain doesn't really work the same way. So I'm having a really difficult time. And I know hearing from other parents that they are too. And so anyway, this just said to me that Boulder Valley knows about this. The scores are going to drop, and that's going to be for 2 to 3 years. And my concern is, what are my kids going to do for 2 to 3 years? Because it's going to be on their assessments. And also, I don't know with the SAT and the ACT what math they're going to use also. So just to sum up, I don't like it. And I just would love Boulder Valley to do what Douglas County did. And I just want to say they passed a resolution opposing Common Core due to the quality of the standards and the principle. And Douglas County, they stated it's their constitutional duty and discretion to set curriculum and standards for their students. And I just would love Boulder Valley to follow that guideline and just maybe, because I'm just so worried about it coming up in the fall when we're going to get the rest of the curriculum in. So anyway, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Well, that was good timing. Yeah, right there. Well, thank you for coming. Thank you for your comments about the Common Core curriculum. The next item on our agenda is board communication. Are there any comments, questions? information you'd like to share from our board? Jim, please.
Just something real quick to follow up on Bruce's, having Donna and Glenn Segru go out and meet with the Louisville City Council. Yeah, certainly those proactive communications. I know they've been concerned about this out in the area, and the best way to address them is to go out and see what's on their mind. And so I'm glad we've got folks out there tonight, and I know they're going to have quite a crew and come back with lots of questions. So thank you for having BVSD represented out there.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jim.
Thanks.
So, thank you for coming tonight. I have a question for you, which is the newsletter that the parents got, and that, you know, she's talking about, Tina. It would be great if the whole board could see that. I'd love to know what we're telling people about test scores dropping and things like that. And just to comment that, we'll talk more in legislative, but I have some concerns about the upcoming tests, which I think, I just have concerns about those. I share the concerns, not so much about the curriculum, but about the tests. And I would like, stay tuned though, because I think we've got coming up on our agenda at some point this spring an update on the implementation of the math curriculum and how that's going. And it's certainly helpful to hear from parents about their own experiences with that as well. So that's all.
Okay. Tim? Thank you.
Well, just the session we had this morning with the Boulder City Council I thought was very productive and got me thinking about the transportation piece, which is a critical area where I think we can really work together to improve conditions in the city. And so I'm looking for an update on where we are with the redo of transportation recommended by our consultants. I'll probably mention that during agenda setting. But I would hope we can get together with the City of Boulder council members more often. I thought it was very worth doing, not just for the relationship building, but to really help nudge us all forward on issues like transportation, where I think we really can work together to make things better for the city and reduce our carbon footprint and make things hopefully easier for our kids to get to and from school.
Thanks. I'll just make one comment about the agenda setting. We've got some other meetings scheduled with other cities too that are upcoming, so that'll be a good thing to do. But I agree with you, it was a neat meeting. Okay. Shelley?
I just want to give you an update on my 4 days in Washington.
Oh, yeah.
Welcome back.
I went to the National Association of School Boards, and that association represents 90,000 school board members across the country. And they had a few issues that they wanted to talk to senators and congressmen about. And I think about 900 school board members descended on Congress that day, in one day, and visited all the offices. And they had a couple of major messages that they wanted us to send in addition to whatever local issues we wanted to take. And their issues were very similar to ours. Local control was one, and funding was another. And within those two categories, there were a couple of interesting issues that came out. Under local control, there was a lot of discussion about the role of the Department of Education in general and the increasing number of regulations, rules, grant conditions, guidelines, everything coming out of the Department of Education. In general, people felt, and there were representatives of every state there, and it was just fascinating to see how similar all of our issues really are from state to state. But most people felt that stuff coming out of the Department of Education was unnecessary. It was federal overreach. It went well beyond congressional intent, the intent of the law, that it limited school board flexibility to make decisions about their own district, and that there were significant financial and manpower costs associated with these guidelines, and that it was in general undermining the whole system of self-governance that governs school boards across the country. So that was a really strong message. They wanted all of us to support a House resolution called the Local School Board Governance and Flexibility Act. And basically what it does is give the Department of Education a bunch of steps they have to go through before they can make any new regulations for us. So far, it was got through the House, but there's no one in the Senate who is sponsoring a companion bill. So they're trying to get a senator to carry that right now, and no one has stepped up. So it doesn't look like it's going anywhere right now. The other issue around local control was preschool. While they acknowledged that preschool may indeed be beneficial, for kids in the long run, they felt like that was an agenda that was being pushed down very strongly from Washington, and they felt like it should be voluntary for school districts, and that if Washington wants this so badly, that they should provide a separate stream of funding for that, so that it doesn't go into the federal pool of money that comes into Boulder Valley, for example, and we have to make trade-offs within the district, whether we do preschool or special ed or whatever, that it needs to be dedicated funding. And then there was a lot of discussion about child nutrition guidelines. And people were not happy that Washington was telling us how many vegetables our kids need to eat. And specifically from Colorado, Cherry Creek was not happy because they serve $4.4 million lunches a year, and the federal government is only giving them 6 cents per lunch to reimburse for this increased number of vegetables, and it's costing them 26 cents. So it's costing them almost $1 million a year to implement this regulation for more vegetables. And so when this person from Cherry Creek brought it up in this one congressman's office, the congressman just looked at him and said, "Kids need more vegetables." It was like the end of the discussion. He didn't want to hear how it was costing more, that maybe we could figure out how to feed kids more vegetables, or just, this is a good thing, and, they weren't going to look at it. So, I mean, I'll give you my comments on my whole takeaway from this 4 days, but that was just one little example. There was also a lot of discussion about the Common Core, and how several states felt like it was a solution in search of a problem, that a lot of schools are doing just fine, in fact, most are. And so why is there this need for this common curriculum for everyone? And there's even more discussion about park testing. Apparently, there's only 17 states who have adopted park testing right now, and some of them are even thinking about backing out because of the cost and because of the belief that we won't really be testing kids' knowledge. We'll be testing their keyboarding skills and, their skill on the computer more than their knowledge. So there was a lot of pushback on Common Core and park. The other big issue is funding, and again, it was increased funding for IDEA, special ed, and Title I. Time after time, we told them they weren't living up to their 40% obligation for IDEA, and time to time, again, they said they don't have it, and there's no suggestion that they will have it in the near future, that we're just barking up a tree that, it's just, they're not going to come up with it. The other big topic was the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, reauthorizing that. That was initially passed in 1965 and then reauthorized as No Child Left Behind in 2002. And they were supposed to reauthorize in 2007, but they didn't. And what they basically want is to reauthorize it and take out a lot of the testing, put in more local control. They want to revamp it and then repass it. And apparently Senator Harkin from Iowa is about to retire and wants ESEA to be his legacy and to get this passed. But the Congress is so polarized on education issues that they say there's no hope of it being passed. So it was actually pretty eye-opening to see that the gridlock that we all hear about is in fact there in spades. Mm-hmm. I mean, they are polarized on immigration, they're polarized on healthcare, they're polarized on education. It's as if they can't do anything and they don't know what to do about it. It's actually kind of painful to watch. So my takeaways, we met with Senator Bennett, a staffer from Senator Udall's office because he was coming back from Colorado, wasn't there yet, and 5 or 6 congressmen, including Jared Polis. And in general, I would say, since I also have a background as a clinical psychologist, I was actually wearing that hat watching these people. And I would say they are so frustrated, they feel helpless. Some of them seem depressed. Some of them seem angry. It just felt like they did not know what to do. They they understand that people do not approve of their performance in Washington. They understand they're being judged and they're not being rated well, but they actually just cannot figure out a way to get out of their gridlock because they're so polarized around every issue. I actually thought a couple of times they need Bob Chadwick. Like, they need somebody to sit down with them and force them to talk to each other. Whenever the subject of local control came up, they adamantly, and this was Republicans and Democrats, said, we have a federal interest in education. And if we are going to fund education, we want accountability. And there's no way around that. Don't talk to us about local control, because that's not something they even want to talk about. It's like a dirty word in Washington. They want federal control, and they want accountability. And surprisingly, Jared Polis was particularly unconvinced that we were being restrained in any way by the federal government. He felt like all our restraints are coming to us from the state of Colorado, not the federal government, and that we need to deal with the state of Colorado if we're feeling restricted in any way. So they gave us a tip that we should never walk into any of their offices and mention the words local control, that we should use the word innovation. And if we can convince them that we are unable to innovate because of their restrictions, then they might be able to hear that. But they will not, just on the principle of local control, care. Some people felt that the Department of Energy, some congressmen, or energy education was overstepping its boundaries, but others felt like Arnie Duncan was just a generous guy who was handing out waivers like popcorn, and that we should all be very grateful for those waivers. This was interesting. There was one congressman, who I won't name, who felt that he really understood local control and felt like he supported it. But he said that what was happening in Jeffco right now gave him tremendous concern, and that he was not going to vote for the ESA because he didn't like how things were going on the Jeffco board. And we pointed out that there were 178 districts, and that that's what elections were for. If people didn't like their board, they could recall them or unelect them, but that really the federal government did not need to take a heavy hand with all of us because he didn't like the Jeffco board. So, and what that just made me understand too was how human these guys are. You know, his kids went to school in Jeffco. He didn't want to see Jeffco go away. He didn't want it to go. And he was a congressman, and by goodness, he could do something about it. You know, it was fascinating. Senator Bennett talked about how we need to stop coming, keep coming and asking for money, because all the money they're trying to come up with for education was coming out of a 17% domestic discretionary portion of the federal budget. They weren't dealing with 100% of the budget when they were trying to come up with this money. They're only dealing with 17%, and there's so many places for that money, and they just don't see a lot of money coming for education. They just don't, because of all the competing, demands. Jared Polis is sponsoring a bill to fully fund special ed, but he has no hope that it's going to pass. So that was, that was basically it. There was a guy from Gallup who came to speak to the whole conference, and the good news was they polled the public, and the public, 73% of the public thinks that their school boards and their school superintendents are doing a good job in managing their schools well. However, 80% felt like other school boards were not doing a good job. So that led people to think that, they're reading the paper and thinking, wow, it must be really bad in Iowa. It's good here in Colorado. And in Iowa, they're reading the paper going, it must be really bad in Colorado. But individually, people felt pretty happy about their school boards and their administration. The other thing he talked about that I thought was interesting that maybe we could think about a little bit was they were gauging student engagement. And they showed where in elementary school, 76% of kids are engaged, and by high school, only 44% were engaged. And engagement was highly linked to performance. So following that trail, they concluded that the number one way to drive student engagement was by having engaged teachers. And the biggest factor to engage teachers was engaged principals. So their conclusion was that the secret to engaging students and having higher student performance was having the very best principals that you could possibly find. And there's a lot of data to support that. So, and their last piece of advice was when you come to us and talk to us and ask for whatever it is that you want from us, that it's really helpful when you bring stories, because then they can all relate to those stories, but they have a hard time just relating to concepts like more funding, local control, et cetera. So that's something to remember, I think, when we talk to our local legislators too. And so I don't know, I think the takeaway message is be a little afraid of what's going on in Washington. So if anyone has any questions, I have a ton of literature and information on what the National Association of School Boards is trying to do. And so I think it's good for all of us that they're there.
Jim?
I'd just like to build on the thing you said there, Shelley, with the like-dislike numbers, the polling numbers, where folks in general like their own school board but don't like the others. It's strikingly similar to how congressional people are elected, where the own re-elects are always 75%, but should everyone else be re-elected? No. My representative's good, but everyone else is bad. But it's strange how those numbers are so closely mirrored. Thanks for going. It's been a while since we've had a member go to the NSBA.
Yeah, it was interesting.
Are you going to go back?
I don't know, they're kind of a tight group now, those 9 people
Oh,
from
yeah.
Colorado. And, yeah, we had some interesting conversations, and there was especially a member from Agate, which is the smallest school district in Colorado. I think they have 36 students in their entire district.
Is it Linden?
Yeah, and he was just in there swinging. It was great. So, it was fun. Yeah. So I don't know. I might go back. We'll see what's happening next year and whether it's worth it. You know.
Yeah. Well, I think the way you've reported it, at least you've talked about some really important issues to some really important people for us. And that's, I appreciate that. As Jim said, I think it's great that you went and that
yeah.
you bring back what you discovered.
Yeah, I wanted to add too, I wanted to thank Briggs and Bruce and everybody who worked on the information that I took with me. It was very helpful. In fact, I was the designee to talk about testing with all these people. And I encouraged them to test once per level, you know, because several of them asked me, okay, it's too much testing, what do you want? And it was very helpful to have the recommendation that you had sent on. So when I recommended testing once at each level, they looked a little nervous, but I felt like they could kind of wrap their head around it, like it wasn't no testing. It was some testing, and they knew we'd have to be doing some interim testing ourselves to make sure that we were there when we tested in 5th or 8th or 11th grade or whatever it was. And so a couple of people wrote that down, and, you know, you don't really know where that might end up, but I thought that was, yeah, very good recommendation on our part.
So I'd like to say, I wanted to talk about the testing during our legislative stuff, but thank you for saying that, because I
Yeah.
so agree with you. And then I wanted to comment on the student engagement piece and how it falls off in high school, because I know we have a lot of people in our state and in our community who think that our job would be done if only we could get 3rd graders all reading on level. But I think that there's a lot more to worry about as kids enter high school and sort of fall off sort of fall off track at that level too. So I'm glad that somebody said that, and I think it's something that as we're strategically planning for the future, we have to remember, which is that we're not done just because kids can read at 3rd grade. So I thought that was interesting. So thanks for going.
Yeah, and the other thing I wanted to add too is that I am so in support of what the superintendents are doing, because the other takeaway in terms of, you know, funding the negative factor, is the takeaway I had is that if we don't do things like that, we're not going to get anywhere. It's not coming to us by any other means other than demanding it and putting pressure on them, because they just have too many competing pressures, you know, and too little money, so.
Are you okay? All right. Anybody else? Great. Well, I would just like to say, I thought the meeting today with the Boulder City Council was excellent, and thanks to staff who helped put that together, Don, Orr, and Glenn, and Bruce, and Sandy. Thank you for that. I thought it was just a great meeting, and I think the city council people learned some things about what's important to us, and I think they're willing to help and work with us, and that's a good thing. I appreciated that they are interested in getting more information, and I think that's an important step. But thank you for everybody for coming to that meeting. I thought it was great. The next item on our agenda is the legislative update. So Bruce or Briggs? Somebody?
Well, I'd be glad to start, and this is a new item, a new standing item to our agenda, so we'll kind of figure this out as we go. I just, maybe for the public as much as others, is that, our process is that we monitor the introduction of bills and provide comment. As representatives, you do that and we do that so that our lobbyists are informed on bills of interest to education and where we might either oppose, monitor, or support. So that's, just something we go through. So Briggs does a nice job of organizing that work internally. So if it's an assessment bill, then maybe Jonathan would weigh in on it, or Ron with curriculum. So that's been a process that's been in place some time. It takes a bit of time to do that. But again, I think it's very helpful to our lobbyists as they are in committee or in the hallway having conversations with our legislators, that they feel better informed. They're not educational experts. They're good at what they do, but we're good at what we do. So that's a way we stay in touch. So that process is continuing this year. There have been some bills that we might normally have weighed in support of, but they involve funding, and so we have not given support on some of those because our primary focus this session so far has been working to secure additional funding for schools across the state, including Boulder Valley. So we've had a real intense focus on that. We delivered today to the governor's office and to each member of the House and the Senate a letter which I've shared with you and has been shared with the media that we would ask that they increase the funding for public schools for this coming year. In addition to the governor's proposed budget, what we called for was a $275 million additional investment to restore funding that's been lost since the beginning of the recession. And so of the 178 school districts, 168 superintendents signed on to this, and every member of the Denver Area Superintendents Group, large and small, gave their support to this letter. So that was delivered today. Briggs assisted us with the distribution of that information to our elected representatives and communicated to the media as well, and it's making its way throughout the state right now. The superintendents organize that effort, and we are working closely with our associations, the Colorado Association of School Executives. Obviously, we're members of that group, but also the School Boards Association, the Education Association for the state, and other groups who have shared interest with us. And so we very much want to stay part of a larger coalition of folks who support public education. Just to remind you that the over $1 billion shortfall that exists in our schools is really the result of underfunding that occurred during the recession. Understandably, the state was in a very difficult place financially, so a lot of programs were underfunded during that period of time. It appears with the leadership of the governor and our elected officials, they're working hard to restore public funds into areas that were reduced during the recession. Our concern was it didn't seem like public education was on that list of restoring that $1 billion, not in the governor's proposed budget, and we certainly weren't getting any indication from legislators that that was high on their list either. So we thought this message was really important, that as the legislature makes decisions around the whole state budget, that part of that is to restore funding to public education. So we didn't ask for $1 billion. That might have been too assertive. We just asked for $275 million because we thought in 4 years or so, assuming a strong economy, maybe we can get back to where we should be under our constitutional Amendment 23. Amendment 23 calls for a cost of living, a COLA adjustment and growth every year. That was passed over a decade ago, and the legislature, again, because of tough economic times, stepped off of that path. We need to restore those funds and then stay on that path going forward. So anyway, that's work that's going on, and a number of our staff have been involved with that, and we have drafted a letter that we would like to send to the legislators who represent our area that would be a follow-up to this statewide letter, and we've reached out to St. Vrain School District to ask if they would like to partner with us on that communication. They've indicated they would, so we're working on a draft letter and right now to do that maybe at the end of this week. Again, we just want to reinforce to those who we see most frequently, our elected legislators, that, my name is on the letter, so I think they know that, and Don's name is on the letter. But I think just to reinforce our support of securing adequate funding back into our schools. So that's been a major effort that we've been involved in, and I've been very pleased with the level of cooperation and common voice we have found on this. So anyway, those are some things we've been working on. I know you've all been working on some bills as well, and we'd be glad to answer any questions. I know Briggs is available as well if you have questions, specific questions about bills or things we're working on.
Board members?
Really? Okay, well, I do. First of all, I think we're all really interested in how we can support the superintendent's effort, because I think we agree, and would certainly, I mean, I think a letter from school boards might be, I think a letter from us might be useful too, but if you have if there's other things that we as school board members can do to support that, that effort, I would certainly like to know.
Well, one thing in addition to a communication from our district, which I mentioned, which, right now it would be Lori as president of the board would sign to represent the board on that, to our local legislators. I think in addition to that, as members of the Colorado Association of School Boards, there's a resolution later we'll consider on the agenda, but the School Boards Association has passed a resolution in support of restoring the funding through the payment into the negative factor, which is congruent with this letter that was delivered. I think that as you serve on the executive committee or have influence on CASB, we've been communicating with them, but again, I think it'd be really opportune time for them to step up. We've obviously been communicating also with Colorado Education Association. So again, we're hoping that we can build momentum around this and really stand together as we seek additional funding. So I think to our state organizations, or if you're affiliated with other state organizations or other groups that support public education, this would be a really great time for them to indicate their support.
Well, and I would just say, I think locally, as one of the ideas about this letter would be, it would be signed by you as the superintendent speaking for the district, that, and that's assuming that, we're coming to this resolution that's coming up, which we'll see how the vote is that's on the agenda for tonight in support of this very specifically, but it would be signed by me, and it would be signed by Tina Mew as president of the local teachers association. So the point would be that it would be the professional education community, locally elected school boards and teachers and administrators speaking about in a unified voice that this is what's really important to us as we represent our community. So that's, I think, where we're going, and we'll see where we are with St. Vrain. I would hope that it would be a joint project that I think is more powerful. I think it's important for our legislators to know that it's we're serious. This is not something to hold back on. So. Are there other comments about legislative issues? Briggs, do you have anything you want to tell us? I don't know, you're there.
Well, thank you, Madam President. I think that the thing we're finding that's important is that the message points, a lot of people, and wearing my other hat, my communications hat, it's frequently I'm told, give me some talking points and give me some message points. And I think in this particular case, the power of what's happening with the superintendents and what's happening with CASB and what's happening with our teacher associations is that the message points are developing up, and they're really becoming pretty clear. One, we will not accept the loss of the $1 billion where the level it's put us at as the new normal, even though the legislature initially tried to tell us that we needed to accept it as the new normal. Two, that the point made by board member Jenny Belval at the last meeting in January, which was we when this recession hit and these cuts hit, there were 178 solutions to cope with that recession. So to have one fix for all 178 districts doesn't make much sense. And then the comments that have been made about local control and the sense of ownership. So I think it's important that the talking points are crystallizing from the ground up. Whether you were for or against Amendment 66, there was not a feeling, I think proponents would agree and opponents would agree, there was not a feeling of a groundswell up, but a feeling of a top down. I think this effort is a feeling from the ground up, and it's coming from places like Holyoke, and it's coming from places like Littleton, and it's coming from Boulder. And I think the value of a joint, and I'll close with the value of a joint, strategically of a joint BVSD St. Vrain letter, is that it's a perfect example of here's Boulder County, and the priorities that if money were to be returned, if negative factor dollars were to be returned or to be made up, how they would be prioritized in two districts within the same county would be different. Even though they're right next to each other, even though they're in the same county, even though they have many similarities, they have some distinct differences, and their local school boards understand those differences, and their local school boards would prioritize accordingly given the opportunity. So that's all.
Great. Well, thank you for those words. Anyone else? Jenny?
So I would just like to encourage, I know a lot of our legislators are having town meetings. I attended one that Diane Primavera had in Broomfield last weekend, not very well attended due to the cold and ice. But education supporters were there, so I was cautiously optimistic, and they spoke up. So I would encourage our school board members, and I hope that we'll also present on this to our groups of, I think we're allowed to present to like DAC and parent council, so I hope that we'll be getting those people on board too, because I think that to hear from actual parents in the district could be powerful as well, and the more that our key parents and key public members of the public know, the more they can let other people know as well. So I would just like to mention to the board a couple of other things that are going on that I know are not our priorities, and so I'm not encouraging us to do anything about. But there's a bill floating around that's aimed solely at the way school boards conduct executive sessions, which is, I think, totally symptomatic of this weird obsession at the legislature. That somehow decided that we're unable to conduct our business without their oversight, and so now they would like us to continue to record when we have attorney-client conversations. That this is passed out of the House Education Committee, that we would have to have on the record all our conversations with our attorney. They wouldn't be public, but they would be recorded, and the topics would be public, so that if we had a conversation with our attorney, anybody could look and see what we'd been talking about, which I think kind of defeats the purpose of attorney-client privilege. And that is, last year there was an entire, it was aimed at all local governments, but they've sort of returned it, just picking us off one by one, I guess. So,
Strategically, you don't have to fight both the education organizations and the Colorado Municipal League. You just separate them.
Yeah.
But that's House Bill 1110 you're discussing. It did clear committee. It was supposed to take floor second reading on Friday. That was held up. It was held over till Monday. There's evidently some problem.
I think there's a problem
And
with it.
developing, not just from our perspective, but there's a problem in terms of the sponsor feeling ready to get the bill off the floor, and so it's been held up now again today.
Okay,
So
interesting.
it's sort of a little bit of limbo on the House floor right now.
Okay. Well, that's good to know. And then I did notice that we have local people in our own district. There was an article in the Daily Camera about the bill, the tag bill. And if you could comment a little bit on that, I'd appreciate it, because I feel like I'm probably not in favor of that bill, and as you know, it pains me deeply. So if you could comment, I'd appreciate it.
Well, I think there's some aspects of it, and I appreciate that our community and our educators are involved in supporting it. If, obviously that they feel strongly about it, or they wouldn't be doing it. I think There are some examples within that bill, however, which are problematic, which is consistent with other bills that have been problematic in the last handful of years. So again, some of what we would be able to do under this legislation, we are doing. But when you think of most districts being in this state relatively small, their ability to do universal screening or have a director for gifted and talented would be hugely problematic, and some could do it through BOCES, but it's this one-size-fits-all challenge that we have. So there's just some systems issues within that bill that would be problematic. And of course, then our challenge would be universal identification without adequate funding. The point of identifying the children would be to support them and help them be successful, but without adequate resources, then again, not unlike the READ Act and several others, to continue to identify things that we're not doing well and then not resourcing it so that we could do it well. And I think the fiscal note on it would help with the universal screening and would help maybe with the leadership piece. But what we actually need is several $1 million here, not for the state, that would allow us to employ staff that could work alongside our classroom teachers. So again, the ideas behind it are good and certainly support another one of our subpopulations of students that need to be serviced effectively, but inadequate resources and increasing expectations one more time is the reason probably it won't gain much traction in the education community overall. But it's one we'll continue to monitor.
And then if you could, I don't know if you shared with those of us in agenda setting last week, the number of minutes that we spend on testing every year by grade level. And I'm not sure if that document got tested, but
It did not. We did not distribute that document. That was a product of the Colorado Department of Education that looked to next year to show the different kinds of assessments and the amount of testing time. We actually have that scheduled for a work session on the 25th, 2 weeks from tonight. So our plan was to bring it and discuss it, and we will bring some additional documentation with that. We might send it in advance, but that'll be a focus of discussion that evening around the assessments for next year because we're in transition right now.
Oh, and I was paying attention during that meeting, you can tell, because I totally forgot. But anyway, so that piece, as anything we can do to halt the onslaught of testing, because while we're also not getting funded, we're wasting, I think that's not too strong a word, huge amounts of time on standardized testing for the state that doesn't do us or our students. It's not that helpful to us or our students, and it takes away from instructional time that we could better be used actually instructing our students. So anyway, I will look forward to that report as well, and I think other board members and maybe members of the public will be as shocked at the amount of time that we spend on testing as I was.
And not just testing, but test preparation
Yes.
as well. Yeah. Okay. Anyone else on legislative update? Thank you, Briggs. Thank you, Bruce. The next item on our agenda are action items, consent groupings, and they include the following: personnel items, approval of minutes for the January 28th regular meeting, acceptance of donation from Louisville Elementary School. Do I have a motion to approve? Jenny? Is there a second? Sam? Is there any discussion? Anyone like to pull any item? Is there any discussion or comments? Questions? Sandy, will you please call the vote?
Albright?
Yes.
Belleville?
Yes.
Benford? Yes. Fuqua?
Yes.
Marquis?
Yes.
Reed?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay, the next item on our agenda is action items, Resolution 14-02, to urge the Colorado General Assembly to restore K-12 funding lost to the negative factor. I have to pull it up here. Do we need to read this because this is?
Your discretion.
Oh, our discretion, oh, good. So has everybody had a chance to read this resolution? We've all read it? Okay, so this is designed. Sorry, I forget. Is there a motion to approve this? Jenny? Shelley, second? Is there any discussion on this resolution? Well, somebody here.
Oh, for heaven's sake.
Okay, Jenny?
So this sort of goes along with this supports CASB's resolution, which just puts all the emphasis on restoring the negative factor and dissuading legislators from taking little bits of money to fund pet projects, but not giving school board. And what we want is the negative factor restored and school boards to have discretion in how to spend those dollars. And I think it lines up very nicely with the state superintendent's effort that we talked about a little bit earlier. And so I plan to support this because I think that one of the state's highest priorities should be adequately funding public education and taking care of our students. And to fail to do that is just unconscionable, and I think it's immoral.
Great. Any other discussion? Okay. Well, then, Sandy, will you call the roll, please? Or call the vote, please?
Albright?
Yes?
Belleville?
Yes.
Benford?
Yes.
Fuqua?
Yes.
Marquis?
Yes.
Reed?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. The next item on our agenda is study items, and the first one is materials adoption for art, music, and physical education. Bruce, would you like to
So,
kick us off?
so it's spring, and our process is that, which is described in the background information. Last year, we spent a fair amount of time talking about mathematics and the investment in resources for our teachers to teach in that area, K through 12. And so in our rotation, our cycle of content areas that we would look at are listed here. And again, as is described in the background, a process where we engage our own professional staff to look at the standards and curriculum and then look at what materials would best enhance their instruction going forward is the process we work through. And then we have a public review of those materials and invite the public to come in and look at them. And so that has all occurred. And what I just would point out is a little bit different than maybe at least most recently when we did mathematics, is included in your background is a description of those items which are proposed as new items, but there's also a listing of items that would continue to be used for instruction that have been previously approved. So it's not remove A, put in B. It is continue to use some materials and then also enhance that with additional materials. And so under Dr. Ron Cabrera's leadership with Instructional Services and Equity, our curriculum directors, there is a budget which has identified the cost in here. So we have adequate funding in the existing curriculum budget to pay for those materials. Ultimately, the way our policy is set up is that you approve the purchase of them, and then when you approve the budget, that's where the resources will be. So what you're really doing is considering approval of the acquisition of the materials later. If that happens, it'll be built into the budget. It is already built in the budget. It'll just occur as an expenditure, and then next year's budget will actually be new materials for the following year. So anyway, I'm sorry, I misspoke. The costs for these materials are in the present budget, and there's adequate funding to do that. So anyway, Roy Holloway is here, and Ron Cabrera are here, and I think we'd be glad to answer any questions that you might have. And this is a study item, so it would be scheduled to come back before you in a couple of weeks for action.
Thank you for putting this together. Board members, do you have any questions about this? Shelley, Tina? No? Jim? Okay. Well, that was quick. I guess there are no questions here
We'll bring it back as action.
for this. So come back in 2 weeks, we'll see. So thank you for coming. Right. The next item on our agenda is another study item, and it's electronic participation in school board meeting policy. And Melissa is walking to the podium to tell us why we need this new policy. So thank you.
So we've had some discussion in cabinet and have a draft of this policy to present to you to really formalize under what circumstances a board member would be participating electronically in a regular or a special meeting. So the law was changed recently to basically give the board guidance as they adopt policies. They're not required that there be a policy, but there's suggested language if you do decide to go that route. And so we've taken the CASB model, had some discussion in cabinet, and that's what we've got for you tonight to consider with your agenda.
Okay, thank you. Any comments, Bruce, or questions? Sam, please.
quick question, Melissa. Because it's happening to me in May, I hate missing meetings, but I have an important family obligation in May that will cause me to miss one of the May meetings. That's not unanticipated. Would that qualify me to phone in? Because I will be in a position to phone in from where I am at that time.
Well, the way the policy is worded, we had some discussion about that, and it really was to pick up those circumstances where it was unexpected.
So no,
that's-
I could not phone in,
Right.
even though I would be able to, because it is an anticipated obligation, not unanticipated.
Right.
And what was the rationale there?
Well, I don't know. It was the idea of being outside the district unexpectedly, the unplanned things. It's really a issue for the board to discuss, and
Okay, yeah. I guess I would like to be able to participate. We all have to make choices, and there are some important family obligations. We choose to attend over board meetings. We don't make those choices lightly, but, it would be nice to, if we can, participate by phone during those times. So I'd vote for changing the wording in some way to allow for that.
I would support that, Sam. I think the intent of this is to allow people to participate when they can't be here, whether it's unanticipated or not. So, I would support that.
Tina?
I don't know if we need to necessarily define when you can participate electronically. I just, there's one sentence that you need to explain the extenuating circumstances, and I don't know if we really should have to explain these circumstances, if we can trust that if we need to participate electronically, that board member has made that.
so we had the
Determination?
same discussion in
Okay.
cabinet, and the reason we got to a definition is because the state law recommendation says the board needs to explain what extenuating circumstances would mean.
Could it be something as broad as the board member decides that they have an extenuating circumstance and must participate electronically?
So I would just say, and I don't want to try to represent CASB in my comments, except this is their model legislation. I think it's really being discouraged. I think the spirit of this is, and we don't have to go that route. I'm just saying I think they really want to discourage not being present for meetings. So I think some of the language is designed to do that. So I think if it's the spirit of this board to make that more accommodating, that's certainly within your purview. But I think that the notion of having it happen at all, they would like it not to happen, if at all possible, not to have people absent. So I think any of these words we've discussed, you can soften or eliminate. And I think that we wouldn't be in violation of law. Is that correct?
Right, and looking back at the statute, so when there are extenuating circumstances as described in the board's policy. So, I think there's an implication that there's something more than, that the board member requesting, all they have to do is say there's extenuating circumstances. I think it's having an agreement among you all of what circumstances would be sufficient.
What?
Well, I'm going to support Sam's motion because I don't know that I think that Sam's family obligation is any less important to him than somebody's job obligations are. And the other thing, so I think it would be good to describe it more broadly, and then if it turns out that we're actually abusing our ability to phone, because
It's your policy,
to phone
right.
in, then we can rewrite the policy if it turns out to be a problem. Because I think we've used it, we've used phone meetings twice, and
I
one
did
of them.
once.
You did once, so Tom has done it for business, and you did it you were not on business. You
No,
were-
it was the personal family
it was a
issue.
family issue, and it was equally important that you be
Right.
with your family as it is for Tom to be in his job. And I think it's a little insulting to,
There is language in here that's limiting electronic participation to 2 meetings per calendar year.
Oh, so that would
So there's
be-
kind of a,
well, then that's
You know,
fine.
some-
Then I don't see why we don't make the accommodation for, we don't make this a little more broad so that it doesn't have to be, the fact that Sam is able to plan ahead shouldn't penalize him, you know?
You get to lie, you get an excused absence, but he knows in advance, so.
Jim?
So I like everything we're talking about, you know, I thought about maybe we just take that whole sentence out, but if we need to define extenuating circumstances, let's just take out unanticipated. It's a personal obligation, we limit it to 2 per year. I guess my question came when I read through this more around, you know, it says participation, which I read that to be as voting. And for me, while I don't mind and, you know, I welcome when you can participate electronically and you don't have to watch the meeting later. You have a chance to be there in the meeting if you're out physically here. But I think there's something about voting to me that made some difference. You know, you're in a remote location somewhere and casting a vote. So I don't know that I feel strongly enough to say I would want to exclude that. I just kind of wanted to bring it up that it is a bit different when you're not sitting in front of the public and casting a vote via telephone. And I think that is part of democracy, is facing those who are going to be affected by your decision in person. But I really do like the remote participation. I mean, we serve as volunteers on this board, but yet we still call in when we can to get more of it. So, you know, you can't take that dedication away from us. And I like how this allows us to do that with taking out the unanticipated part. So, my 2 cents.
So any thoughts on Jim's comments about voting, or?
I do think it's a little different when you're not here. It can feel a little strange, I would think, to vote from afar, but I also feel like as long as you're participating in the meeting, then, you know, you probably deliberated in the same way you would if you were here. And so I think voting should be included in meetings. Just my feeling.
Well, the other thing that's interesting is you could have a 3-3 vote. You know, I mean, it becomes an even-numbered board
Right.
if someone's not here. But it is okay to roll over a vote into the next meeting as well, on voting.
There is a caveat that the board member participating electronically has to be able to hear all the public comment.
Jim?
Can I ask you a question of, are we aware of any other school district that has passed a policy at this point?
I'm not. I mean, I have not looked.
And then, you know, I also know from my experience in Lafayette that they've recently also struggled with this. And I don't know that there are a lot of municipalities that currently have policies like this in place either. Do we?
And the statute came up through, you know, Board of Education specific legislation.
So I think I would just add, in conversations with Attorney Dick Bump, I mean, as Melissa introduced this, you know, we don't have to have a policy. It is his recommendation that you do, because, you know, we did it without one recently. And and I guess we would generally agree that makes sense to give ourselves guidance on that. And I think we'd be glad to go back and work on the one paragraph that softens that up to address Sam's point, and then we can bring it back in 2 weeks. And there is that limitation of 2 a year, and we have improved the technology connectivity, which we've struggled with a bit in the past, and so we think that'll work better, which I think in part you'll be able to hear the participation of the remote individual better, as will the public, and I think they will also be able to hear the public discussion and comment easier than we've been able. That's been difficult in the past just because of our technology inadequacies around that, but we're on top of that. So I guess I would just say, I just guess reinforce what I think you said earlier, is that it is your policy. I think we'll write it, obviously stay within the limits of the law, but I think try it for a period of time and see how it works, and you obviously can make it more restrictive or less so in the future. So I think it would get us started at least, and we could make that one change that's been requested.
Okay. Okay. All right, good. Okay, thank you. Take a crack at it and bring it back.
Melissa can query out to her peers in Colorado with school districts just to see if others have in front of us, and maybe they've got some insight around this policy that we'd want to consider as we bring it back to you. But we'll check on that and just see who's moving along with us on this, so.
Okay, thanks. The next item on our agenda is agenda setting, and I heard Sam earlier talk about being interested in having information on transportation.
Right. I mean, I think it was almost a year ago, we had that report from the outside consultant that made a series of recommendations regarding our bus service. We had multiple bell times that were leading to inefficient routes. We had more buses than we needed, and if we moved to sort of best practices, we could save hundreds of thousands of dollars and put that back into the classroom. And I was thinking about that as we were meeting with the city council today. And I heard, Bruce, I think you said we're considering shortening the distance from a school at which a student qualifies for bus service. I might have missed that if that has come up before, but just made me want an update on where we are with those recommendations that I believe we as a board signed off on in general. I don't know if we actually voted on it, but said go for it. And then we tried a little bit, pulled back. So that's a long way of saying I would like an update on the transportation. And I know there's a lot on the agenda. I haven't seen the agenda setting list, but I think I also asked for an update on special ed back in December. So
No,
hope that's on the list. Thanks.
We'll add this one.
Okay.
good, yeah, we can talk about
I'm not trying to
transportation.
pile on. It's just
No, pile on. May's coming. It's our busy time of year, right? No, I think it's a good idea. Yeah, to see. Anyone else have anything for agenda setting? Tina?
I would like to discuss at some point how to figure out a way that we can ask questions over to the District Accountability Committee prior to when we reach a study item. So one example might be, or prior or simultaneous or just after, so that we can get the District Accountability Committee's feedback. So an example might be when, before they look at the district improvement plan, if we have specific questions for them to explore as a group because of the unique, because of their representation in the district. Another one might be when we look at the assessment on February 25th, it would be interesting, I think, to have some specific questions for the District Accountability Committee, as it would have specific impacts to the preparation of the school improvement plans and their works in the SACs as well as in the DAC. Does that make sense?
Okay.
Okay.
It's an interesting question. It's always a little tricky. I mean, I think the agenda setting committee should discuss it. I think you've raised a really good question. What's always interesting to me is trying to move something forward quick enough that we can act on it. You know, giving people information. It means that we need a lot of lead time, but there are some things I think we can do that with. So I think it's a good question for agenda setting group to talk about. So thank you for bringing that up. Anything else for agenda setting discussion? Okay, so in a minute, we're going to adjourn. I'll take a motion to adjourn, but after we adjourn, we are going to reconvene here in this room. We'll take a 5-minute break, and we'll reconvene in a special meeting work session, and we'll be talking about the budget, guiding principles and priorities. So do I have a motion to adjourn? Tina? Is there a second? Shelley? Do we need to vote? No, we don't need to vote. Okay, 5-minute break, and we'll meet out here in the middle. And so thank you very much. Thank you.
Bruce, I'm ready to take the abuse for changing.
Resolution that we just passed today.